Right now on Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News.
I have a lot of concerns about the survivability of Colorado's insurance market right now.
Insurance premiums are going up, and fear is rising that for some, filing a claim might get your insurance canceled.
We are in the most challenging property insurance market that we have ever been.
From wildfire to hail, insuring your home is getting harder and harder to do, even for those that might not think they're at risk.
Low risk is not no risk. All we need is the right set of conditions.
What Colorado insurers are saying and what you can do to mitigate your home before the next natural disaster strikes.
Welcome to Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. I'm Colorado Public Radio's Nathan Fernando-Frescas.
And I'm Denver7's Micah Smith. Each week, in a partnership between Denver7 and CPR, we have a real talk about issues impacting underrepresented people across Colorado and amplifying voices you may not always hear. Today, we're looking at insurance costs and why Colorado might be on the verge of a crisis in coverage. Right now, on average, insurance rates are $818 higher than they were in 2020. And on top of that, Colorado now has the fourth highest premiums in the country.
And for places like Phillips County on the far northeastern plains, premiums are now 55% more costly than they were 4 years ago.
And it's not just the increasing cost of insurance. There's also fear that filing a claim might get your coverage canceled.
Yeah, CPR News reports that in places like Grand County and the mountains west of Denver, insurance non-renewals increased by 77% in 2023 compared to 2018. And the state's insurance commissioner says there's a, quote, real risk right now that insurance companies will not renew you if you file a claim.
So what does all of this mean for you? Joining us now is Kate Harris, the Chief Deputy Commissioner of the Colorado Division of Insurance. Kate, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's a pretty scary quote that Nathan just shared. The real risk that insurance companies will not renew if you file a claim. What is going on here?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is that Colorado insurers are being more cautious due to the catastrophes caused by climate change, both in Colorado and around the country and around the world. And they're really assessing their portfolios, particularly in higher risk areas.
Now, let's step back a little bit. What do you do and what does the Colorado Insurance Division do? You know, what are you about?
Sure. So we regulate the insurance industry here in Colorado. Our mission is consumer protection. We work to help consumers with their questions. And if they have issues with their claims, they can call us and email us. We have a team that works directly with them and with the insurers. We also review plans and premiums to make sure that they're fair and that companies can stay solvent.
I want to talk about the Marshall Fire because in 2021, I think everybody was just shocked about this fire happening in the suburbs, really having a huge impact, not only on the direct communities themselves, but surrounding neighborhoods and areas. This is a place where you usually don't think of a wildfire happening. What is the insurance division doing to educate homeowners about their risks of natural disasters like fires in their suburban neighborhoods?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it took a lot of people by surprise, and we've been seeing it happen around the country, sadly, in Lahaina and Maui, as well as more recently in Los Angeles. And so, what we've done is really work to educate consumers, make resources available on our website. We did a series of in-person town halls around the state last year and heard from a lot of consumers on what they're struggling with. And really what they can do to mitigate their homes and help keep their insurance.
So what is the insurance division doing to educate homeowners about the risk of natural disasters like fires? Because as they're finding, they're calling insurance companies and they may have to step through a couple more hoops than maybe they did a couple years ago.
Yeah, so we really encourage folks to look at their policies every year when they're renewing, make sure it has the level of coverage that you're comfortable with, and work with your local agent. They're the ones who really understand what plans are available in your communities, what discounts might be available to you from the mitigation work that you've done to your home, perhaps, and can really help you assess your coverage and make sure you have the right coverage that you need.
Kate, let's go kind of worst case scenario for a moment. Let's say you just can't get homeowners insurance. Does Colorado have a plan for those that can't get homeowners insurance?
We do. So 2 years ago, the Colorado legislature passed what's called the FAIR Plan, and it's being stood up right now. They should be quoting policies in the next month or so, but they've been standing up basically a brand new insurance company. It's an insurer of last resort, truly for folks who have no other options. It's not intended to compete with the private market, and that's by design. It's really meant for folks who cannot find any other type of coverage.
And places like California have something like this already. Why so late for Colorado to have something like this? Because we're, kind of right in the thick of wildfire areas and things like that.
Yeah, and Colorado was actually the first state in about 40 years to stand up a FAIR plan. Many states had stood them up back in the 80s, the ones who existed. But we knew a couple years ago that we could see this coming, and really fortunate that the legislature was supportive of putting a plan in place so that there will be coverage for folks who don't have any other options.
Yeah. You mentioned noticing this was coming a few years ago. What are some of the very, specific elements that would cause a denial of homeowners insurance?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on the area and where you live and a lot of different factors. But one of the things that's really going to depend on your wildfire risk score. And that is a score that is calculated by third-party modeling companies. And one of the things that we're working on this legislative session is a House Bill 1182, which would require those companies to make your score available to you, to tell you what data is being used to calculate your risk score, and what mitigation you can do to help lower your score and make sure that those mitigation efforts and investments that homeowners have made are accounted for when their properties are being assessed for renewal.
Because I've heard, in the foothills, people are mitigating almost to the point of, well, we don't want to live here anymore. Like the beautiful trees we had around our house, they're all gone now, things like that. And so you're saying this score would be something that they can look at and be like, okay, here's where I am now, and here's where I need to be if I'm going to have an adequate chance of insurance.
Yeah, what we've heard from folks is that they have made some really significant investments in making changes to their properties, but those mitigations aren't always considered in their score, or they're not updated frequently enough to make a difference when it comes time for renewal. So what we're doing is working with the legislature on this bill to make sure that information's more transparent and available to consumers, and that they know if they have $500, $1,000, or $10,000 to spend on their property to mitigate it and really try and protect it, that those investments will be seen in their ability to lower their score, hopefully, and keep their policies.
And for our viewers and listeners, it may not be a bad idea if you're in the market for buying a home to try to figure out what that score is before you get into a home that you absolutely love but just cannot get insurance for, or you have to pay literal thousands of dollars to get it to that proper mitigation score. Kate Harris, Chief Deputy Commissioner of the Colorado Division of Insurance, thank you so much for joining us for this Real Talk. Insurance providers are in the business of covering the cost for damage or loss to your home. But with natural disasters becoming more frequent and more widespread, the business model is starting to feel the strain.
Up next, Colorado's rep for the insurance industry joins us. This is Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. Welcome back to Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. I'm Colorado Public Radio's Nathan Fernando-Frescas.
And I'm Denver7's Micah Smith. When wildfires raged across Los Angeles, entire neighborhoods burned, displacing thousands of people. Now the task to rebuild is ongoing, and many are having to do that with no insurance. Insurance companies are having to rethink how and where they insure homes. And with the impact of climate change and the increase of more devastating natural disasters, this is a big task. In California, the state's largest insurance provider announced in 2023 that it wouldn't write any new policies in the state.
Yeah, and last year the company said it wouldn't renew around 30,000 policies. Now, to be clear, Colorado is not California.
That's right. The Rocky Mountain Insurance Information Association represents property and casualty insurers in Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. They say over the last 40 years in Colorado, the cost of natural disasters is between $20 billion and $50 billion. In states like California, that cost is around $200 billion.
Yeah. So here to give us some context is Carol Walker. She's the executive director of the Rocky Mountain Insurance Association. Thanks for being here for this Real Talk.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate being here.
So give us a 30,000-foot view of the state's insurance market. Should people be concerned about losing their insurance in Colorado?
We are in the most challenging property insurance market that we have ever been. We call it a hard market in insurance terms, where everything that insurance pays for is more expensive. That is from the cost to repair and rebuild, so construction costs, labor shortages. And then we're in that perfect storm of where not only do we have the record catastrophes happening, they're colliding with that hard market. So as we see, we're number 2 in the nation for hail insurance claims. number 2 for wildfire risk after California. So we have big concerns about affordability and availability of insurance. We're not California yet, but we do have concerns that they're in an insurance crisis, and not just because of their catastrophes, because of bad public policy decisions. We're just a few bad public policy decisions in Colorado away from being California. So we have to be really looking at solutions, but solutions that make sense and don't further disrupt our market.
So from an insurance point of view, what are the bad public policies?
So what they did in California, really, they suppressed rates artificially. It took 2 to 3 years for insurance companies to be able to increase rates at a time, as I said, we're seeing those exponential increases in the costs of paying out those claims, from everything from repair and rebuild to lumber to windows, everything else. And at the same time, we see record-breaking catastrophes. So insurance companies have to be able to charge a premium to be able to pay out those claims. We saw that break in California. So nobody, I'm a Colorado homeowner, wants to see their insurance premiums go up, but they do have to keep pace with those costs to pay out claims. What you started seeing in California, as you said in the intro, is insurance companies basically making really tough business decisions that they couldn't stay in the market because they would go bankrupt and not be able to pay out the claims for all of their policyholders. So we really don't want to make those same mistakes. So as we're looking at insurance solutions, I think what we really need to be talking about is reducing risk and mitigation solutions. That's the real answer, Nathan.
And I think that's a huge question, the fact that you're in the business of insurance. This is what you
Right.
do. But again, you also have the homeowner who lives in, beautiful foothills or in the mountains of Colorado who feel they've done enough to mitigate. And they're still saying, yeah, we're not going to insure you anymore. And so how do you thread that needle saying, we're going to insure you, but you have to kind of do some work here yourself?
Yeah, as insurance companies are reevaluating their risk and they have a lot of pressure of who they can take on and how much risk they can take on, mitigation really is the key. The science shows us is there is a lot you can do to put the odds in your favor to reduce your risk, but it has to be meaningful, verifiable mitigation. So just doing a few of the right things, that may help, but a pat on the back isn't going to get us to a safer home or an insurable home. What we need to be looking at is measurable and scalable mitigation. Of course, fire doesn't care. It knows no boundaries. So not only do you have to do all the right mitigation, but so does your neighbor. And then it has to be measurable at a community scale for the insurance company to look at it and say, that is a better risk for me to take on. So those are really the goals that we're working through at a state level, at a community level with our partners, to really try to figure out how can we get this done? How can we help people through grant programs, do it at a personal level, make that investment in making their homes safer and more insurable? And then how do we do it at a community scale?
What if there is a big fire again, like the Marshall Fire? What happens? Can the insurance market survive?
Now, I have a lot of concerns about survivability of Colorado's insurance market right now. If insurance companies are able to rate for their risk at an appropriate amount, if they're able to make good business decisions, they'll stay in the state. Really, and if we're looking at mitigation, we know we're working toward reducing that risk. But if it makes it too much pressure, too difficult for insurance companies, and it'll put their business at risk, their other policyholders at risk for solvency, that's when we get in trouble, Micah. We have been in a challenge market, and we are very close to that tipping point. And we are a high catastrophe state for wildfire and hail. We're an expensive state to do business in. We're also one of the least profitable states in the country.
And so is the government, the state government, working with you all? Like we just heard there's a bill working through the State House now. How are they dealing with this? Because that's pretty scary. And I think listeners are like, well, what's the government going to do to help us with this? How are we going to, get ourselves through this situation of a crisis in the insurance market here in Colorado?
Well, the common ground that we have on this legislation at the State House right now is mitigation. We have common mitigation goals. Our concern is how we get there. If some of these bills will add costs, they will add burden onto the insurance companies, that'll make them think twice about staying here. So we really do need to be careful. The stakes are very, very high. We are working with the legislative sponsors, with the Colorado Division of Insurance, but we need to make sure that we don't tip the scales in the wrong direction.
Carol Walker, the Executive Director of the Rocky Mountain Insurance Association. Thank you so much for joining us for this Real Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, what you can do to mitigate your home from the next big wildfire. We've talked a lot about mitigation so far, whether you live in the mountains, suburbia, or the plains.
Stay with us. This is Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News.
Welcome back to Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. I'm Denver7's Micah Smith.
And I'm Colorado Public Radio's Nathan Fernando-Frescas. The 2021 Marshall Fire destroyed entire neighborhoods and was a wake-up call for many communities on the threat of wildfires.
First Street is a nonprofit that uses research and technology to assess and communicate climate risks in the United States. They've mapped every address in the country and rate how climate change impacts its risk.
And some of the locations we mapped, including suburban cities like Lakewood, just west of Denver in Jefferson County, are at high risk for wildfire within the next 30 years. Places like Applewood and Green Mountain, near but not usually considered butting up against the foothills where wildfires are usually thought of occurring. With fire mitigation and prevention part of many Coloradans' way of life now, we want to make sure every household knows the steps to take to stay fire wise.
So joining us now is Tom Welly, wildfire mitigation specialist with West Metro Fire Rescue, which serves nearly 300,000 residents in Lakewood, Morrison, Golden, Wheat Ridge, and Edgewater. Thank you so much for being here today, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
West Metro actually has a wildfire risk assessment map of its own. What factors are used to determine the risks for neighborhoods?
So when anybody does a community wildfire protection plan, there's usually a mapping process with that. And the one that West Metro used at the time was called No Harm. It's an acronym, but it really combines fire severity and fire frequencies. And then there's another piece that really develops the wildfire hazard rating, which takes into account the susceptibility of for ignition of structures. So you marry those things together to kind of come up with an idea of how communities are at risk within the wildland-urban interface.
And it still surprises me that, First Street says, hey, Lakewood, you're going to see a major fire within 30 years. And they've done their research. They say there's high fire risk there. But these are neighborhoods much like the Marshall Fire, where you just don't think that a wildfire is going to bear down on, next to your kid's school. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
The fact of the matter is these fires don't just gobble up neighborhoods. They may be the initiator of the ignition process within the built environment.
What do you mean by that?
So a wildfire may likely toss a lot of embers into a neighborhood, let's say. And depending on the vegetation type, the more effective those embers are at igniting. What we miss, what we don't get, is that our structures are often more susceptible to ignition than the surrounding vegetation. And if you look at any of the video from anywhere, Marshall Fire, LA, wherever, you will see fully involved structures and completely destroyed structures, and yet you'll have green vegetation right around them. And that's because the structure is more ignitable.
So what can homeowners do? What should we be doing to try to protect our families, our properties from that experience?
So the biggest thing we try to do is interrupt that process. The science is very clear on how we can make this a non-disaster situation. We have to prepare our homes to be able to receive fire. We have to adapt. Fire is going to happen. Even extreme fire is going to happen. The wildland urban fire disaster does not have to happen. So we have to make our homes and the things that attach to our home much less susceptible, particularly to embers. 90% of the homes that we lose in wildfires are from embers. So when Marshall happened, let's take that as an example, people were shocked, okay, because they were in grass. It's the same story no matter what the fuel model is. It's a different fuel model in California, but the same story. We get the initial ignition. It comes to fences or a shed or a deck that then carries that to the structure. Now we go, because of close built environment, structure to structure. And once we get simultaneous multiple ignitions of structures, your fire department, any fire department, is really behind the power curve. So we've got to stop that from happening in the first place. We've got to stop the ignition of the structures, let the wildfire go do what it's going to do, and then we have an opportunity then to save communities rather than lose them.
And I don't want to, sell what you all do very short because you protect us from wildfires, right? But what I'm hearing you saying is it's also a two-way street. You have to, as a homeowner, also be ready to protect yourself if that fire comes. But I'm assuming you all, as fire professionals, kind of know what you're looking for when there is ignition, and you will hopefully stamp that out if you can before the wildfire does go through a neighborhood.
Yeah, and that's somewhat led us into where we are right now, right? We suppress like 98% of the fires.
I see.
2% of the time, they get to extreme conditions to where we cannot. And so what we're saying is we're going to be there, we're going to be doing what we do, but we can't do it alone. So rather than have the homeowners helping us fight the fire, that is not what we want.
Like with the hoses and things like that out there, yeah.
We want you out of there and evacuated and safe. That's our first priority, is life safety. Then we'll talk about being able to protect property. So the work that the homeowners need to do that is vital to this is done well before there's smoke in the air.
So should we be cutting down trees, bushes? I know I'm, being a little funny here, but in all seriousness, now I look at my home and I'm like, oh gosh, like, is this fuel for a fire?
Sometimes I do this all the time with folks. It's a lot less about trees. If you've got a continuous bed of trees where crowns are touching, then yes, crown fire is a big thing for you. But for most of our areas, particularly like in West Metro's district, we've got some pretty good separation in the most part from crown fire. Crown fire is not our biggest thing. Crown fire's got to get within about 30 feet of your structure to ignite a wood wall. So then why are we burning down all these homes? It's embers. And so then we need to drop back and go, all right, if we've got some separation of the trees from the home, 10 feet is usually what we recommend. And that's mainly because we don't want it dropping debris into your gutters, because your gutters sit at the edge of your roof line where your roof is ignition resistant. But if that debris gets on fire, it gets underneath that roofing now to the wood underlayment, and we have a roof fire. Same way with like bark mulch against the foundation of your home. A lot of places by HOA CCNRs require that. It's critical. That stuff ignites in about 20 seconds from embers. Bark mulch does. And again, you've got a gap at the base where your siding comes down and where it meets the foundation. There's wood behind there. If you've got a stucco home, I almost guarantee you there's wood behind there. If you've got a stone facade, there's wood behind there. And so if you back that out, and we recommend, as NFPA does, a 5-foot non-combustible barrier around the home of rock or whatever, you keep it clean, you eliminate that vulnerability. Yeah. And so then we start talking about decks. What have we got on the deck? What do we got for potted plants that are right against windows? What have we got for furniture and the cushions on the furniture? Sometimes your home is pretty solid, and yet the cushions that are sitting underneath an eave on your deck ignite, and that will be what takes your home. Simple stuff. It's not always the expensive stuff.
All right, Tom Welly, Wildfire Mitigation Specialist with West Metro Fire Rescue. Thank you so much for joining us for this Real Talk.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's this week's episode of Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. Every week, we have a real talk on issues that impact Coloradans who are often overlooked.
You can find all of our shows at denver7.com/realtalk or at cpr.org/realtalk. Have a great day.